Welcome back to our study, God in America. In our previous session, we toured many of the national monuments and buildings. One of the buildings we looked into was the Library of Congress, which is one of the largest libraries in the world, over 25 million cataloged books. One reference that we didn't mention is found in the North Corridor, where there is a mural representing the concept understanding. The engraved plaque below this mural contains a Bible passage from Proverbs 4, verse 7. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. This is an extremely appropriate passage to be found in one of the premier archives of learning in the world. The link between education, the Bible, and God extends back to the very earliest of recorded language. And this is the topic that I want us to consider in this session: education. What were the founders of our country doing in the realm of education? Did they desire an educated populace? Were there benefits of education to the individual and to the society that they discussed? And for our study especially, what was their view of God and the Bible being in the classroom? Today's context has seen, for all practical purposes, God and the Bible removed from public schools. If there are Bibles, they're scarce. If there are Christian morality discussions, they happen quietly. Personal actions are seemingly tolerated, but there is so often a sense of guilt placed on those students or teachers who engage in religious discussions or actions. What a far cry from early American schools, where the religious and moral education of youth was paramount. It is historical fact that the Bible was the central focus of American education in the very beginning. It was the first book in the classroom. The Bible was used not only to teach content, but to teach a child how to read, how to write, how to memorize, and how to recite. Let's take a moment to look at some of the foundations of the American education system. The Puritans, who founded Massachusetts in the early 1600s, believed that the success of the colony depended on the individual being literate enough to read both the Bible and the laws of the colony. So in 1642, the Massachusetts Bay Colony passed a law requiring children to be taught to read and write, which was the first of its kind in this new land. The school law of 1642 read this: "This court, taking into consideration the great neglect of many parent and masters in training up their children in learning and labor and other implements which may be profitable to the commonwealth, do hereupon order and decree that in every town ye chosen men appointed for managing the prudential affairs of the same shall henceforth stand charged with the care of the redress of this evil, especially of their ability to read and understand the principles of religion and the capital laws of this country." Notice, as we had mentioned, education was important for the individual in society to both know the laws of the land, but also the principles of religion. A few years later, in 1647, another Massachusetts school law was passed to extend this first law. Here is how the opening of this second law reads: "It being one chief project of that old deluder Satan, to keep men from the knowledge of the Scriptures, as in former times keeping them in an unknown tongue, so in these later times by persuading from the use of tongues, that so at least the true sense and meaning of the original might be clouded by false glosses of saint-seeming deceivers, and that learning may not be buried in the graves of our forefathers in church and commonwealth, the Lord assisting our endeavors." All right, when they reference tongues in these statements, the meaning is languages. So in past times, the Bible was not allowed to be available in the known language of the people in certain places and circumstances. And so it was kept unknown tongue. And the officials here are also saying that in these later times, many people do not even know how to read their spoken tongue or their spoken language. This is what the law was intended to remedy. The law then goes on to establish a system where smaller towns would appoint a teacher for reading and writing. But then in larger towns, a grammar school would need to be set up where students could be prepared for university. But as you can see from the first line of this second law, the purpose for educating the youth was to overcome ignorance and their ability to read the Bible. This law has become known as the Old Deluder Law from its opening line, but it provides significant context to how important education and learning were in conjunction with the moral foundation provided by Christianity. And all of this was to ensure the future health of the colony, continuing beyond its originators. But Massachusetts wasn't the only colony where this mindset that the health of a good citizenry depended on an education in morals and civics and general abilities. In 1650, a few years later, the Connecticut colony copied the Massachusetts law to similarly encourage the education of the youth in their ability to read English, the laws, and be educated in the principles of religion, meaning Christianity. So with education becoming central to these new colonies and population, there was now a need for teaching aids and guides. While the Bible supplied content and text, there was a need for the fundamental teaching of the alphabet, spelling, and grammar. To fill this need, the New England Primer became the first textbook outside of the Bible, printed and generally used there in the colonies. It was prepared and printed first in Massachusetts by Benjamin Harris. It was published around 1690 and continued to be the most popular text used to introduce the alphabet and the foundation of reading throughout the 1700s. And it even had an edition published in 1930. In the 1900 edition, there was an introductory description of this work's historical impact. Here's what it says. The New England Primer was one of the greatest books ever published. It went through innumerable editions. It reflected in a marvelous way the spirit of the age that produced it and contributed, perhaps more than any other book except the Bible, to the molding of those sturdy generations that gave to America its liberty and its institutions. You can see in this turn of the 20th century description the recognition that even this textbook, with its over 200 years of great success, was secondary to the Bible's impact on molding those early, sturdy generations that brought about liberty. So with it obviously positioning itself behind the Bible, let's look at a few examples of the type of educational content that made it such an enduring text. For example, page 2 of the 1777 edition has a divine song of praise to God for a child. All right? And then on page 4, it lists a table of the alphabet, consonants, vowels, and double letters. Pages 7 through 9 lists some simple words grouped by 1 syllable, 2 syllables, 3, 4, 5, 6 syllable words. And then on page 9, there is a short section titled A Lesson for Children with a few simple sentences that children can practice learning to read. Here are the first 10 sentences that are listed. Number 1, pray to God. Number 2, love God. Number 3, fear God. Number 4, serve God. Number 5, take not God's name in vain. Number 6, do not swear. Number 7, do not steal. Number 8, cheat not in your play. Number 9, play not with bad boys. And number 10, call no ill names. You can see the focus, simple sentences, but on God and morality. Pages 10 through 13 provides the alphabet with the letter, an image, and a rhyming sentence that in most cases had a Bible character or a moral message. Here's just a couple examples. The letter B, heaven to find the Bible mind. Letter C, Christ crucified for sinners died. Letter M, Moses was he who Israel's host led through the sea. Letter N, Noah did view the old world and new. Letter Y, while youth do cheer, death may be near. And letter Z, Zacchaeus, he did climb the tree, our Lord to see. You can see all of the biblical references and the way that it rhymed to teach the alphabet. Pages 15 through 17 lists the alphabet again with the title An Alphabet of Lessons for Youth, where each letter begins a moral sentence based on a Bible passage. Here are some examples. Letter B, better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble therewith. That's Proverbs 15, verse 16. Letter C, come unto Christ, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and he will give you rest. That comes from Matthew 11, verse 28. G, godliness is profitable unto all things, having the promise of the life that now is and that which is to come. That comes from 1 Timothy 4, verse 8. Letter N, now is the accepted time, now is the day of salvation. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 2. Letter R, remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth. That comes from Ecclesiastes 12, verse 1. All right, page 17 concludes this alphabet of lessons with the Lord's Prayer. Page 36 gives Agur's prayer, which is a direct quote from Proverbs 30, verses 8 through 9. Remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me, lest I be full and deny thee, and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain. All right, about 15 to 20 pages of the text offers sequences of questions and answers from the Bible. Simple questions, simple answers. Here's just a few of them. Who made you? Answer, God. Question, who redeemed you? Answer, Jesus Christ. Question, of what are you made? Answer, dust. Question, for what end were you made? The answer, to serve God. Question, how must you serve Him? The answer, in spirit and in truth. You know, in a perusal of the 1777 edition, there are only 3 or 4 pages that do not have a reference to God, Jesus, or the Bible. And those few pages are mainly simple listings of the letters in lowercase, capital, or italic form. So as you can see, this first and long-standing introductory primer did its job of beginning the reading process, but through that process thoroughly saturated and familiarized the youth with biblical moral teaching. All right, the next significant American published public school textbook was the American Spelling Book, written by Noah Webster, published in 1787. When it was revised in 1829, it was renamed the Elementary Spelling Book, and it took on the nickname Blueback Speller because of its blue color on the outside. Webster's spelling book dominated public education from the late 1700s all the way through the Civil War, with some estimates claiming that it sold around 70 million copies going into the early 20th century. Similar to the New England Primer, the Blueback Speller taught essential basics of reading, spelling, and writing. But in doing so, it was absolutely infused with simple moral principles, with statements about God, aspects of Christianity with Bible quotes that overlapped these areas. So here are a few examples of some of the common sense moral truths that youth would learn as they sounded out the words, as they learned their spelling, as they practiced their writing. Good boys and girls will act well. Teachers like to see their pupils polite to each other. We punish bad men to prevent crimes. Labor makes us strong and healthy. You can see the simplicity of these statements, how certainly these moral principles would help the teachers and the community to have citizens concerned with contributing beneficially to the whole society. But through this book, the youth would also be presented with the foundations of where these moral principles even come from. Read with me some of the simple statements about God that are found in this text. Good men obey the laws of God. God is the divine legislator. God will bless those who do His will. The Holy Bible is the book of God. Now, I have not listed these statements in order as they appeared in the book, but thinking from an educational perspective, as you worked your way through the book, the sentences increased in their difficulty, both the length and the word usage. Similarly, some of the concepts contained within the sentences increased as well, including the use of numerous direct Bible quotations as sentences that students would need to practice. Here are some of those quotations from the Bible. Strong drink will debase a man. Proverbs 20, verse 1. God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and all that was made was very good. Genesis 1, verse 31. How can a young man cleanse his way? Psalm 119, verse 9. Let us lay up for ourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust can corrupt. Matthew 6, verse 20. And finally, here is a sample of some passages that tie the moral principle foundation not only to the existence of a creator God or the Bible as God's word, but that Christianity was the source for understanding how to fully live out these common sense principles of life. Here they are. We go to church on the first day of the week. The preacher is to preach the gospel. A love of trifling amusements is derogatory to the Christian character. Christian humility is never derogatory to character. The various sentences that I have shared with you are only a small sampling from this text. But you can see that a central purpose of the American Spelling Book, or the Blueback Speller, was to educate both the academic mind and the moral mind, to prepare a child to lead a productive, disciplined life with a grounded and uplifted spirit. All right, now in the history of elementary public education, a third prominent set of texts used were the McGuffey's Readers. First printed in 1836, the series consisted of 6 readers corresponding to 6 levels of difficulty. With over 100 million copies sold through the late 19th century, it is thought that practically every American who attended public schools during that time would have improved their reading through lessons contained in these books. This resource now brings us 100 years from the birth of the nation. And with the new generations now leading the country, what was the place for God in America? These volumes, like those already noted, educated the mind through lessons that were ethically and morally based, and absolutely full of biblical references and the essentiality of Christian morality. A quick perusal of the various tables of contents demonstrates the point. The first and second readers focus on learning the alphabet and working on very simple words, like dog and cat, run and play. But they are also introduced to words like Lord and God. Here is a short poem found in the first reader. God made the little birds to sing and flit from tree to tree. 'Tis He who sends them in the spring to sing for you and me. All right, then as a sample, here is a short set of sentences found in the second reader. Do you see that tall tree? Long ago it sprang up from a small nut. Do you know who made it do so? It was God, my child. God made the world and all things in it. He made the sun to light the day and the moon to shine at night. God shows that He loves us by all that He has done for us. Should we not then love Him? All right, the third reader began to give longer passages and paragraphed stories. Here are some of the titles of the short essays from the table of contents in Book 3. The title, Things to Remember. It was about God's protection. The Lord's Prayer from Matthew 6, verses 9 through 13. A short story or paragraph titled, Who Made the Stars? You can guess, all about God's creation. And then one titled, A Child's Hymn, poetic song form asking God to help their lives. All right, if we turn to the fourth reader in this series, we find the following stories. The Good Son, a story based on honoring your father and mother, right, from the Ten Commandments. A story titled The Creator, and this was actually a longer poem about God's creation. Then there was a story titled The Golden Rule, a story about a young girl named Susan who was reflecting on whether she had applied the Golden Rule that she had read in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. And then there was a story titled King Solomon and the Ants. It was a fictional poem about King Solomon and how he learned from the ants. All right, the same theme of foundation in Book 4 extends into the fifth reader. Here are a few titles from the fifth reader in the McGuffey Reader series. Select paragraphs. These were sections of content taken from the Bible. One titled, The Righteous Never Forsaken. It comes from Psalm 37, verse 25. There was another one titled, The Goodness of God, and it was excerpts from the Bible. And these last three are pretty apparent. The Hour of Prayer, Religion, the Only Basis of Society, and the Bible, the Best of Classics. All right, finally, here's a few passages contained in the sixth reader. The titles are Speech of Paul on Mars Hill, directly from Acts chapter 17. There was one titled, God is Everywhere. Another one titled, God's Goodness to Such as Fear Him. There was one titled, The Death of Absalom, coming from 2 Samuel chapter 18. All right, that's the six readers and a little snippet of what was inside of them. You know, the New World Encyclopedia, in their article about William Holmes McGuffey, the author of McGuffey's Readers, had this to say in a synopsis about his work. The McGuffey Readers dealt with the natural curiosity of children, emphasized work and an independent spirit, encouraged an allegiance to country and an understanding of the importance of religious values. The readers were filled with stories of strength, character, goodness, and truth. The books presented a variety of contrasting viewpoints on many issues and topics and drew moral conclusions about lying, stealing, cheating, poverty, teasing, alcohol, overeating, skipping school, and even foul language. The books taught children to seek an education and to continue to learn throughout their lives. All right, that last phrase, learn throughout their lives. That brings us to the topic of higher education and the system intended to help in the teaching and training of higher trades and skills. College and university systems had existed for centuries before the colonies in America, so their model was one that was well acquainted among the founders and the framers of the new states and the federal government. So it's not surprising then to see that colleges were some of the earliest education institutions in the colonies, well before the Revolutionary War. Today, there is a large number, wide variety of colleges and universities all across America. Some focus on specialties, while others offer wide ranges of disciplines, from medicine, engineering, computer technology, music, law, education. While there is a similarly broad range of worldview environments, from conservative to liberal, it has become almost universal that the climate on these campuses is far more liberal-minded in terms of religion and morality. As compared to the actual population of the United States, there is far more atheistic, agnostic, anti-religious ideologies inside than there is outside. Polls through recent decades and extending back to the last half of the 20th century demonstrate that this has even been an increasing trend. As one researcher who performed a national survey of professors and administrators has said, he says, it appears that a fairly liberal student body is being taught by a very liberal professorate and socialized by an incredibly liberal group of administrators. Indeed, universities bear a large share of the blame for a modern silencing of God, removing the Bible from the classroom, casting a shadow on Christianity among recent generations of Americans. But this was not always so. As we have said, it is a recent generational trend that cannot be further from the origin. Indeed, from the very beginning of the nation and before, colleges were founded by ardent advocates of Christianity who designed these institutions of higher learning to educate the mind and encourage the moral principles of the Christian religion. And in many cases, with the express purpose of propagating the skills of teaching the Bible and teaching it effectively. Who can believe it? To our modern ears, this claim may even sound preposterous. Universities were first set up in order to train teachers and preachers? Well, let's take a look at some of these universities. And I would guess you're probably familiar with some of their names. The first institution of higher education in the colonies was Harvard College, founded in 1636, named after its first benefactor, John Harvard. The 1636 rules of Harvard included the following declaration. Pay attention, listen to this. Let every student be plainly instructed and earnestly pressed to consider well the main end of his life and studies is to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal life, and therefore to lay Christ in the bottom as the only foundation of all sound knowledge and learning. And seeing the Lord only giveth wisdom, let everyone seriously set himself by prayer in secret to seek it of him. Everyone shall so exercise himself in reading the Scriptures twice a day, that he shall be ready to give such an account of his proficiency therein. Over a century after the founding of Harvard, the state constitution of Massachusetts reiterated the original and the continuing purpose of this institution. In Part 2, Chapter 5, Section 1 of the Constitution that pertains to the University of Cambridge, Article 1 reads this: Whereas our wise and pious ancestors, so early as the year 1636, laid the foundation of Harvard College, in which university many persons of great eminence have, by the blessing of God, been initiated in those arts and sciences which qualified them for public employments, both in church and state. And whereas the encouragement of arts and sciences and all good literature tends to the honor of God, the advantage of the Christian religion, and the great benefit of this and the other United States of America. All right, so according to the founders of Harvard, as well as the architects of the state constitution, themselves founders of the republic, what was the purpose of education that they stated? They said to know God and Christ, to honor God, to demonstrate the advantage of the Christian religion to the benefit of the entire country. based on that original purpose. It is evident that while university education today meets in the same marble edifices, it doesn't have the same foundation, and it doesn't provide the same goals. The second college I want us to look at is Yale. Founded in 1701 in the Connecticut colony, it had as its stated purpose to be a school wherein youth may be instructed in the arts and sciences, who through the blessing of Almighty God may be fitted for public employment both in church and civil state. I want you to listen to a few of the student regulations that each first-year student had to copy for themselves. Every student shall consider the main end of his study, to wit, to know God in Jesus Christ, and answerably to lead a godly, sober life. Every student shall exercise himself in reading Holy Scriptures by himself every day, that the word of Christ may dwell in him richly, and that he may be filled with the knowledge of the will of God in all wisdom and spiritual understanding. All right, here's another. It is appointed that some part of the Holy Scriptures be read in morning and evening prayer in the hall, and exposition be made thereon by the rector, and all undergraduates shall be present and attend. Daily Bible reading, prayer, and living a godly life, those were the foundations the students were to base their education on during their studies at Yale College. All right, the third college I want to share with you may be less familiar to many, but it was technically the second college established in America in 1693, William and Mary. The charter was granted by the King and Queen of England, William and Mary. Here's how it read. William and Mary, by the grace of God of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland, King and Queen, defenders of the faith, etc. To all to whom these our present letters shall come, greeting. We, taking the premises seriously into our consideration, and earnestly desiring that as far as in us lies true philosophy and other good and liberal arts and sciences may be promoted, and that the orthodox Christian faith may be propagated. That was the charter that the college was founded on. All right, the fourth college established in America was Princeton, founded in 1746 in New Jersey. 6 years later, in 1752, one of the trustees of the school, Gilbert Tennant, and a later college president by the name Samuel Davies, they prepared a brochure describing the school, which included the following explanations of its purpose. Nothing has a more direct tendency to advance the happiness and glory of a community than the founding of public schools and seminaries of learning for education of youth, and adorning their minds with useful knowledge and virtue. It will suffice to say that the two principal objects the trustees had in view were science and religion. Their first concern was to cultivate the minds of the pupils in all those branches of erudition which are generally taught in the universities abroad, and to perfect their design. Their next care was to rectify the heart by inculcating the great precepts of Christianity in order to make them good. But as religion ought to be the end of all instruction, and gives it the last degree of perfection, stated times are set apart for the study of the Holy Scriptures in the original languages, and stated hours of daily consecrated to the service of religion. All right, Harvard, Yale, William and Mary, Princeton, and many more that could be added. They have in their charters, in their school missions, in their school regulations, they have similarly focused on the purposes for their need or even their existence as being God, the Bible, and understanding the gospel. If we take a brief glance at some of the original school mottos, it further testifies to the beginning purpose of education in America. For example, Princeton, which we just looked at, their motto in Latin translates to this: under the protection of God, she flourishes. All right, the fifth college in the colonies, founded in 1754, was named King's College. Today we know it as Columbia University. Its motto is translated, "In thy light shall we see light." Brown University, the seventh oldest college in the United States, was founded by Baptist preachers in 1764. Its Latin motto means, "In God we hope." Dartmouth, the ninth oldest college, has a motto that translates to this: "A voice crying in the wilderness." An obvious reference to Isaiah's prophecy of John the Baptizer from Isaiah 40, verse 3, and fulfilled in Matthew 3, verse 3. All right, if we move forward about 50 years to 1821, we find Columbian College being chartered on land provided by George Washington himself, which is why today it bears the name George Washington University. But here's its motto: "In God our trust." Northwestern University, founded in 1851 by Methodists from Chicago to serve Americans in the Northwest Territory. Its motto comes from Philippians 4, verse 8, "Whatsoever things are true." And lastly, the University of California at Berkeley, a university known through the 1960s as a center for activism and rebellion toward traditional moral values. Here's the university's motto: "Let there be light." Even here, an obvious reference to the Bible in Genesis 1, where those exact words are uttered by God in creating the cosmos. In many ways, the look at America's educational foundation, it's both encouraging and disappointing. It's disappointing to see how much has changed in the over 250 years since our nation was born. Dr. Dave Miller expressed this disappointment in the book, The Silencing of God, when he said, "The American educational system has strayed far from its moorings. We have shifted from a nation that saw its very survival as dependent on the spread of Christian principles through the schools to a nation that literally disdains, repudiates, and has ejected the teaching of Christian principles from the educational system. The founders would be appalled." Dr. Miller's correct. In going along with that, though, listen to what one of our founders, Dr. Benjamin Rush, a physician and signer of the Declaration of Independence, what he had to say concerning the focus of education.
"The only foundation for useful education in a republic is to be laid in religion. Without this, there can be no virtue, and without virtue, there can be no liberty. And liberty is the object and life of all republican governments. We profess to be Republicans, and yet we neglect the only means of establishing and perpetuating our republican forms of government, that is, the universal education of our youth in the principles of Christianity by the means of the Bible. For this divine book, above all others, favors that equality among mankind, that respect for just laws, and those sober and frugal virtues which constitute the soul of republicanism."
Here's another stalwart supporter of education, Noah Webster, and he echoed the same sentiments. Here's what he had to say.
"In my view, the Christian religion is the most important and one of the first things in which all children under a free government ought to be instructed."
But remember, I said it was also encouraging to study and consider our educational foundation. And this is because we can see that the principles that built our amazing nation are principles that can always be put back into practice. If they have decreased in their application, if they have been neglected in their use, then it only takes a new generation to put those principles back into practice. The founders foresaw what a nation would look like if this priority was lost. But they also understood what God had said to Moses long ago. He said, "Gather the people to me, and I will let them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on earth, and that they may teach their children." Deuteronomy 4, verse 10. And they also knew the principle of God's wisdom written through Solomon. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs 14, verse 34. Whether you are a student or a teacher, whether you are young or older, let's commit to making sure that we are helping this generation restore God in America.